right, so today on Aquarian Insights, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Today we are talking about my new book, The Autoimmune Revival, and we are in these fancy new digs. I am here today with my dear Megan,
I'll be the host. Just you wait.
and we're going to discuss the book, the frameworks in the book, why I wrote the book, and why I think it's so important. And for those of you that have read the book already, the reason Megan's here is because she's a big part of the story. I've helped hundreds of people work through their own autoimmune conditions, and it wasn't until that I had to help my own wife through these things that I fully understood the depth and breadth of which these things affect your life and how to work through them in a systematic way that leads to truly overcoming these things. So I'm excited to talk to Megan today and have her pepper me with 1,000 different questions.
It's
As
not
I
a
know,
1,000.
with
It's like 30.
okay, with 30 questions. And we will talk about the frameworks in the book, why I wrote the book, and hopefully help you guys and give you some insight on my thoughts around autoimmunity.
The Autoimmune Revival, reawakening the body's rhythm, resilience, and immunity through the 4 pillars of autoimmune healing.
There you go. Let's get started. So today we are going to spend some time talking about my new book, The Autoimmune Revival. And I have today with me my dear Megan,
Hello.
who was a big part of writing this book and our journey together in helping her recover from her multiple autoimmune diseases was the big impetus for writing this book. And it's a big book, as you can see. It took me about 700 pages to communicate the totality of a working framework for how to recover from autoimmune conditions. So what I wanted to do with the book is not simply say, okay, well, if you have X, just take X, Y, and Z, or apply some kind of magic intervention and everything goes away. I think in the time that we live in now, there's a lot of contributing factors to autoimmunity. And I really wanted to outline those things and my experience with patients and my experiences with Megan in helping her overcome these things. And so I invited Megan here today to ask me a million questions, as she's known to do,
I'm really good at it.
and hopefully elucidate some of this framework on how we actually work towards recovering from autoimmunity. So, without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Megan.
You open the Autoimmune Revival by saying you didn't want to write it, which, as someone who's read it, I've never read a book that started with the author didn't want to write it. So what ultimately convinced you that this message needed to be shared?
Yeah, I think I had hummed and hawed about this for a long time, as you know, right? And over the years, in helping you and just helping hundreds of other patients with this kind of thing, you had sent something to me once, and to basically to the effect of, when you were younger and you had been first diagnosed with all this stuff and you were trying to figure out what to do, who to see, kind of what interventions to do. You were looking at all the books, you were going to the library, you were trying to figure out for your own sort of how this all works, what it actually means, and what to do. And so a big reason I wrote the book is if someone has some kind of autoimmunity diagnosis, they have a reference they can turn to give them sort of a living framework on guidance on what to think about, what to consider, and sort of how to work through these things strategically rather than sort of being lost in multiple different things.
So why didn't you want to write it?
Because it's a giant undertaking, to be honest. And I've always thought that as a professional, I've always tried to learn as much as possible. So my learning is continuously ongoing, as you know, right? Like, I haven't really stopped school, even though I've been out of school for a while. And as we learn more about how the body works, as we learn more about environmental factors, as we learn more about all of these things, it was really, really hard to contain that all in this, right? And so, truthfully, if I had not cut stuff out of it, it probably would have been about 1,400 pages, but absolutely no one on the planet would have read it, right? And I think what I wanted to do with it was not write a textbook, right? Because it's very easy to write sort of this magic clinical textbook, but I wanted to make it relatable and experiential. So there's a ton of case studies in it, there's a ton of our experience in it, and just how we strategically work through these things. And I think after writing it, what I realized was, in a day and age where we can get so easily distracted with information, in a day and age where we get so easily distracted with sound bites and Instagram reels and TikToks for quick hacks and easy things or whatever, we needed a lot more context. All of these big, seemingly heavy health conditions need more context. There needs to be more of a discussion. And in retrospect, I think a book is a perfect way to do that, because it takes us away from all the distraction. It takes us away from all the shiny object syndrome. And we get to just actually work through it and understand kind of the framework behind and the thinking behind what we're after, right?
So, how did watching someone you love suffer change the way you view autoimmune disease?
You're talking about you, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is, as a physician, we see people, whether that's for 15 minutes, half hour, whatever, and we give them advice, we tell them what to do, and our hearts are hopefully all in the right place, and we're trying to do positive things, but then they go away. And we don't see kind of the day-to-day. We don't see the little fluctuations. We don't see the frustrations. Even though we have those conversations with people, we're not sharing that experience with them. And I think with you, I had to share that experience with you, and it was a beautiful, amazing experience. And
I think I remember it differently.
well, I think one of the important things is, when we're after true healing and we're working through resolving things positively and not just suppressing symptoms, our body, as it's relearning and retraining, goes through different healing processes that feel like when we first got diagnosed, that feel like old symptoms coming back, that feel like all of those things. And that was a really real experience with you, right? Like, as things started to heal, as your joints started to heal, as different things started to heal, you had experiences where, oh, it reminds me of this. And it instantly took you back to 5, 10, 15 years before, where that meant you had to go to the hospital, that meant you had to have all these crazy interventions, but that meant all of these things. And part of that is the body sort of retracing and going through how to heal properly. And in that process, there's a tremendous amount of mental and emotional healing that ideally should happen, right? We are bringing things to attention again from a different place, ideally from a sort of more grounded, higher place where we can assess them. But living that out with someone real time was an interesting experience, and I think a net positive experience for sure. And it was at that moment that I realized, like, oh, there's a lot of ups and downs and things. So now when, people are going through things, as you should, the way that we've sort of shifted and changed our practice is open lines of communication 24/7, right? Because instead of just saying, okay, do X, Y, and Z, I'll see you in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is, there's a constant open line of communication, because I know what that feels like now at 10:30 at night when something shifts, changes in a way that reminds you of old things. And it's like, oh shoot, what do I do? I need to, do I need to go to the hospital? Like, is something wrong? Like, all these things. And working through that with people real time has become an important part of our practice for sure.
So when I first told you everything that I went through as a physician, what stood out the most?
Yeah, I think lots of things. One, like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure. What?
Number one, your resilience.
Oh,
Yeah, honestly,
that's
I
kind.
think when people get so inundated with interventions, right, and whether it comes from the conventional side of things, right, like here's 3 drugs, now here's 6, here's 10, or from the quote unquote alternative side, like take these 45 supplements and you'll feel better, the weight of that wears on people for sure. And it's hard to continue to want to get better rather than just acquiesce to, well, I guess this is just my life and this is just what I'm going to do. And you were resilient enough and stubborn enough to kind of consistently work through those things and consistently seek deeper answers, right? You're like, that's not good enough.
It wasn't like a red flag as a physician for a patient to be
No.
stubborn and not take your answers as truth.
No. I think when people have been sick for a long time, it is completely normal to sort of second guess things a little bit, because when you start any kind of healing journey, you're just accustomed to listening to whatever physician you see, right? But when that doesn't work and in actual fact makes you worse, well, then you start to question things a little bit. But it all comes from the place that you do the questioning from, right? Like if it's questioning because of open curiosity and wanting to understand more, which is where you were coming from, that's different than questioning because you're just not going to do anything anyone says anyway. Right? So
That's a
you've
good
put up
point.
sort of the walls and you're not going to do anything anyway, and that's just sort of a defense mechanism. That's not where you were coming from. I think on the other side too, just the conversations that you had with all the different specialists and all the different physicians and all the different people were somewhat astounding to me, to be honest.
In what way?
Well, you just got put on a whole bunch of drugs, and then they were like, well, we don't really know what's wrong with you, but it's some kind of autoimmune thing. And then they gave you a whole bunch of different diagnoses. And then eventually you had 5 different ones. And then eventually they were like, well, it might be cancer. It may not be autoimmune. And then you got put on cancer drugs, and then you get put on all of these different things.
And they never put me on anything for my hair.
Wow, your hair's great.
I waited for that one.
It's great now, so you don't have to worry about that.
Now it is. Thank you.
And so that was just kind of astounding to me, because it just really spoke to me sort of how fractured everything is. Because you'd go to a specialist and they'd say one thing, and then you go to a different one and they'd say a different thing, and no one seemed to be on the same page, and no one seemed to have a collective idea of what was actually wrong. And that was a bit shocking for me. And when patients come in, you hear the stories and stuff, but like the depth and breadth of which you had to go through all of that stuff was still shocking for me.
So getting more into the nitty-gritty of the Autoimmune Revival, moving past the introductory chapters, you mentioned that the common explanation of autoimmunity being an immune system attacking itself is incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you believe that?
I think the biggest thing in that predominant narrative of your immune system just randomly attacking itself because of you inherited quote-unquote bad genes, or some docs will say, well, it's just your food, you just have to change your food, but you're never going to fix the genetic part, so you're kind of stuck with this forever. I believe that we are magnificently and intelligently designed, and our body doesn't make mistakes. And so when you approach things that way, there's a reason why we get sick. And sometimes illness is unfortunately the perfect solution for everything that we're going through, right? And so, yes, our body forms antibodies against our own tissues, but there's a reason for that. There's always a reason. We just have to look and understand what those reasons are, right? And through years of working with hundreds of people, through years of looking at all the data, all the clinical research and stuff, the frustrating thing is all of those answers are there, but they're just not considered because it's far easier to give someone an immunosuppressive drug than it is to actually seek and figure out what the underlying causes are and attend to them.
Is that what you meant when you described the medical system as silencing the fire alarm rather than looking for the source of the fire?
Yeah, completely. I mean, this is true for you. This is true for everybody else. You have a symptom, you get put on something that suppresses the symptom, then you develop a new symptom, and it continues on. Meanwhile, all of the processes underneath at a cellular level that are triggering these autoimmune type reactions in the body are never dealt with, right? Like the underlying mechanisms are never dealt with, which is why I developed kind of what I call the 4 pillars of autoimmunity, which are, in my opinion, the 4 main things that drive autoimmunity, right? So in modern times, it's really circadian rhythm imbalances. So the fact that we're not outside enough, the fact that we're under artificial light all the time, has predefined immune triggers, right? And then we get into toxicity, right? We're probably the most toxic generation in modern history, just between all of different exposures we have starting at a very, very young age. And then we get into kind of the chronic infections. And these are sort of underlying infections that can precipitate autoimmunity for a number of different ways. And then there's the trauma component, sort of the psycho-emotional trauma component, which everyone wants to brush off, but that's a very real phenomenon. And they've even done studies on kids and followed them throughout the years, and women who've had what they call adverse childhood events, right? Like something bad happened when you're a child. If you had at least 2 of them, you're 75% more likely to have an autoimmune disease because it shifts and changes how your body processes threat. So when I have traumatic experiences when I'm a young child, everything becomes a threat, and then I start becoming reactive to those things, right? So when we work through those 4 areas with people, we can have a lot of success at calming that autoimmune fire and overcoming it. And the reason I don't include genetics and diet and all of that stuff is because I think those shift and change based on these 4 things. Now, part of the problem with autoimmunity is everyone just deals with genetics and diet, and nobody wants to touch this stuff.
Well, genetics and diet's more fun to deal with anyways. But what led you to identify those 4 specifically?
Yeah, it was just partly the way that we conduct our assessments. I don't have preconceived notions about what's wrong with somebody, what's actually wrong with somebody, right? People come into the office all the time and say, I have lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or all of these things. And when we understand that those are just diagnostic labels based on a collection of symptoms, then we can say, okay, well, what actually is causing this? And when we go through and dig deeper, usually we find some sort of toxicity. Usually we find some sort of chronic infection that stayed for a long time. Usually we find some sort of psycho-emotional trauma in an environment that's incredibly imbalanced because people don't spend enough time outside. People spend too much time inside. Everyone's on electronics all the time.
Us included.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that you're constantly buttressing in our modern environment. And look, we're talking on cameras and doing all that fun stuff.
People are
right now.
listening to it on their phones.
Right. So there's modern convenience, and it's a beautiful, amazing thing. But we have to understand that there's a biological cost to that. So it's just appropriately using it. And that's part of the reason why when we look at autoimmunity rates, they just keep rising and rising and rising. It's because these four things feed off of each other. And so if I just had mercury poisoning, right, or mercury toxicity, but my circadian alignment was good, I didn't have any chronic infections, I had no history of trauma, then my body could probably manage that without developing an autoimmune condition, right? But when we start to stack all of these things on top of each other, they feed off of each other, right? And so classic example is certain infections feed off certain toxins in the body, certain heavy metals in the body. And that was the case for you, and that's the case for a lot of people. Trauma sets the stage in the brain, lighting up certain brain parts in our limbic system to perceive threat for everything, right? And so when we're exposed to toxins or exposed to infections, we have a disproportionate immune response because of previous history of trauma. And sometimes, in a lot of people, until we rectify that sort of original thing, we can do all the stuff we want, but we don't begin to get appropriate immune responses out of that.
So, out of the four pillars, do you feel there's one that's the most overlooked from a patient standpoint?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person, right? In general, I would say the circadian rhythm component's usually the most ignored.
Why?
Well, people don't want to give up their phones and their TV and their all of those different things, right? And so there's that part of it. And then on the flip end, people don't want to deal with their unresolved trauma. And I think people can conceptualize a little bit like, oh, there's certain toxins in my body that are making me sick. And if I get rid of those, that will be helpful. Or I have this infection that's lingered around too long. And if I deal with that, then I'll start to feel better. Because those are physical, somewhat tangible things, right? And it's another level of understanding to say, hey, all the processes in our body function on a 24-hour clock that is based on our light and dark exposure. And if we mess that up, that sets the stage for immune dysregulation. That's a harder thing for people to conceptualize a little bit.
Well, especially with like daylight savings time.
Right. But you just look at the data on daylight savings time. Every time they switch the clocks, heart attacks go up, strokes go up, car accidents go up. All of these things go up because we are not attuned anymore. We've just shifted overnight and 1 hour, right? And so those are usually the toughest things. But everyone kind of has a preference, right? Like some people come into our office and they've done tons of trauma work. They've gone to counseling. They've done all of these different things. But their light environment's not very good, right? Or we have people who have gone down the rabbit hole of circadian biology and have, cut out a lot of things that are disrupting it and get a lot of sunshine and all of these things. And they think that is the cure-all for everything, which is very, very helpful and necessary. That's why it's the foundational pillar. But if they have a chronic infection that won't go away, or if they have unresolved trauma, they're only going to get so far, right? So in general, the circadian rhythm component and the trauma component, but everyone has a preference a little bit.
So, why are chronic infections so often missed? Isn't that something that would just pop right away on lab work?
Yeah, so if we backtrack a bit, when we think about infection, we think of some kind of cold flu, sort of acute thing, right? Like I get sick all of a sudden, I have a fever, maybe I go to the hospital or I go to urgent care or my family doctor. I do some blood work, I have elevated white blood cells, I'm having a normal immune response to these things. Then I might get put on antibiotics or I might get put on these other things. When we say infection, that's what most people think. The problem is a lot of different types of bacterias and different pathogens can stick around in the body after that acute infection. And or sometimes some of the interventions for infections just suppress the infection, so it doesn't show up on lab work anymore, like basic blood work anymore, because it's moving deeper into tissues. Okay, so when we think about just standard blood work, it's going to pick up stuff that's in the blood, essentially, or acute movements of things. Most chronic infections are different types of bacteria and other pathogens that move deeper into tissue, right? They move into the lining of our gut. They move into different organs. They move into our tonsils, into our lymph system, into our nervous system, all these things. And that's compounded by the fact that a lot of these infections form what are called biofilms, which imagine kind of like a sort of a film of living pathogens. Good,
Like chia seeds, they get that like jello-y around them.
Right. But there's also good bacteria in there and everything else. It's just a constellation of different bacterias and other pathogens. When infections reside in those, one, our immune system can't actually deal with them. So then our immune system, because it can't get into the biofilm, so then our immune system starts sending off warning signals and saying, hey, something's wrong. I know that the bad guy's behind the door, but I can't get to him, right? But also, too, that means that nothing's really going to show up on blood work. So we have to do other forms of specialized testing to really try and elucidate these things rather than just standard blood work. But that's why this is always missed, because unfortunately some of the testing is quite expensive or quite involved. So most physicians and most patients won't think about going there just from a cost perspective. But as you know, just with your story, I mean, one of the biggest things for you was Lyme disease.
Correct, yeah. Right. And that was missed the whole time.
Correct. You went to multiple specialists and multiple hospitals and all these different things, and that was consistently missed. And part of the reason it's consistently missed is the testing for Borrelia, like the standard of testing for Borrelia, isn't very good. So you have to use specialized testing. But with Lyme disease, that is one of the known factors that causes autoimmunity. And so that becomes an interesting discussion of why nobody went for it and kind of looked at that. But that just requires a shift and change in thinking. Because if you're presenting with lupus, like symptoms, right? Instead of saying, okay, well, maybe there's an infection under here that's precipitating this, we're just going to give you drugs for your lupus, you're good to go, right? Rather than saying, okay, well, what's underneath this? What kind of infections are potentially going on? Let's rule these in or out. And having no preconceived notion of what they are, right? Like, it wasn't up to me whether you had Lyme disease or not. You did. We worked on it.
Unfortunately.
Right. And it's a tough thing to resolve, as you know.
Yeah.
Especially when it's been going on for years, right?
Oh, yeah. So moving on from infections to toxins, just like Cole's Notes bird's eye overview, in your opinion, what are some of the most common exposures that people overlook?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note, like, at the very beginning of my book, in the preface of the book. Yeah, I basically stated in the book, right in the preface. Hold on, let me find it here.
I'm not used to the videoing.
Here you go.
These,
on literally the first page. That some of these things, when we bring them up, you kind of need to have an open mind. Because there is reality, and then there's our perceptions of reality. And sometimes when we're actually looking at what drives autoimmunity or what drives other conditions, if our perceptions don't match the absolute reality of things, then we're like, oh, well, that doesn't count. That doesn't matter, right? So, for instance, on a perfect thing is when you asked about toxins, well, dental work is a major sort of source of toxic exposure. And so we know now that the quote-unquote silver amalgams that are filled with mercury that they put in everyone's mouth for years that were deemed safe, well, they're not very safe, because that mercury off-gases into our brain, into our nervous system, and ends up in our gut, and is a major contributor to all sorts of digestive autoimmunity, to all sorts of neurological autoimmunity, that has to be considered, right? But that's just one of the things that sometimes people are like, oh, well, I don't really want to go there, even though it's a major source of their presenting symptoms and condition, right? And so that's one of the big ones with toxicity. Obviously, the water we drink has certain things in it. The preservatives in our food, cause certain digestive problems.
I read somewhere that in America, and we're in America, surprise if you guys didn't know, that we allow way more just like junk, so-called junk,
Yeah.
in our food that's not allowed anywhere else. Why is that?
It's just the glory of a free market a bit, right? You get to pick and choose. But picking and choosing means that you have informed consumers, and I think the biggest problem is we don't have, as a populace, we're not particularly informed or don't particularly care. And all companies that have had products out, food products out for a long time, and rightly so, they've shifted and changed how they make things to make it cheaper for them. But the net effect of it is there's more preservatives, more additives, more things that can disrupt our gut microbiome, all these different things. But even on that, I wouldn't consider that necessarily a major source of toxicity.
Why not? We eat things all the time.
Well, we do eat things all
Our
the
whole
time.
life.
Yes, we do. Because I think the heavy metal question is much more toxic to the system. So things like mercury, lead, cadmium, aluminum. Aluminum's not really heavy metal, but it's a metal. Those are far more toxic and shown to be producing more autoimmunity in the body than just food preservatives, right? So we kind of have that. We have the pesticide question, which is a very hot topic these days, but a lot of researchers and a lot of my colleagues have really shown the detrimental health effects of all the different pesticides we use. And to your point of, in America, using preservatives and additives in foods that they don't allow in other countries, well, most of the pesticides allowed in this country aren't allowed in other countries.
Oh, gosh.
Because they've been proven to have all of these neurological and gut microbiome effects that contribute to autoimmunity, right?
I wonder if there's ever been a study in the individuals who are spraying all of that and their overall health.
So this is a slightly off topic on autoimmunity, but one of the most enlightening studies was in Mexico, and they looked at the farmers and the farmers' children when they started spraying certain pesticides. I won't say them by name, but when they started spraying certain pesticides, and they measured the spatial reasoning of kids on these farms. And so they had them draw a picture of themselves. And when they first started spraying, before the kids were toxic with this stuff, it was just a little picture of how you'd assume a 5-6-year-old would draw themselves. And then over time, it becomes much more fragmented, much more disjointed, showing that there was a lot of neurological effects happening from all this continual spraying.
Oh, goodness.
Right. So, and the gut microbiome effects have been proven time and time again. So those are kind of the major ones. And then when we layer in some of the newer forms of toxins, everyone wants to say EMF and is not a toxin, but in my world it is.
I think that's more so because it's not tangible.
Yeah, of course.
If you're new to it,
Yeah.
trying to wrap your head around what EMF is
Yeah, it's just the radiation coming off of all of our devices, all of our Wi-Fi routers, all of those things, unfortunately have very deleterious health effects that contribute to autoimmunity in very, very specific ways. And none of these things I'm saying is like a one for one, like, oh, if you have this, that means you have this autoimmune condition. And that's where the waters get muddied a little bit, right? Because science, TM, will say, well, that's not a thing. But when you actually look at real research done by real researchers, all of these things are causative factors and have very specific mechanisms in which they break and shift the immune system. And it's not until we seek to rectify those things collectively that we begin to heal, which is part of the massive frustration for people. Because even if they go to like a functional practitioner or integrated practitioner with an autoimmune condition, and that practitioner says, okay, well, it's all about heavy metals. We're just going to do lots of heavy metal remediation and you're going to feel so much better. That might be true for some people, but there's a lot of other toxins that can contribute to things. So it's about assessing someone and figuring out what the big levers are, what the whole constellation of their toxic load is, and carefully and selectively working through that rather than just blaming it all on one thing.
Your book also addresses trauma and emotional health. Why is that conversation essential in your mind when discussing autoimmune disease? Other than what you've already laid out a few moments ago with the trauma response and the neural pathways lighting up throughout life after traumatic childhood events.
Yeah, that's a great question. The most simple way that I can put it is when we have a truly traumatic experience in life or multiple traumatic experiences. And I'm not talking about like, oh, I'm just really stressed at work or whatever. I'm talking about truly prolonged traumatic experiences that can either be one time or over the course of months or years. What happens is we get this shift and change psycho-emotionally where we begin to disassociate from our body. Okay?
And is that something that's limited just to childhood? Or is this something that throughout life can turn into a factor that needs addressing?
Yeah. So most commonly it's during childhood, but there's a lot of times and seasons where that can happen, right? And it can happen on an individual level, but it can also happen on a collective level, right? Like if you look at all of the health data post-World War II, it led to groups of people who were traumatized from the war and have all of these different health conditions after, right? You look at all the data that's coming out post-COVID, everyone who had to live through that, not because they had COVID, not because of anything, but just the sheer trauma of that experience of basically being locked in your home for months and not knowing what was going to happen, all those things.
And washing your grocery bags before you unloaded the groceries to wash the groceries.
Right, all that crazy stuff, right? Like that's creates this massive trauma response. But I think simply it creates a level of disassociation between my thought processes and sort of my psyche or my soul and my body. And what happens is we start to perceive there's a disconnect, when in all actuality there's not a disconnect, right? We are body, soul, and spirit all together. But when I start to pull those things apart, that changes the wiring in my brain. That changes how my autonomic nervous system works, which changes how my immune system works. So then everything starts to be perceived as a threat because we don't feel like we are integrated. We become these pieces and parts rather than integrated whole human. And when that happens, and then we get infections, and then we get toxicity, or then we get these other things, even if under better circumstances we could process those things appropriately, all of a sudden we can't. All because there's now a disconnect, right? And a lot of the times, rightly so, kind of our psyche holds on to really traumatic experiences, not even in our conscious mind, in our sort of subconscious mind. And when we're holding on to things as a protective mechanism, well, then all of a sudden it becomes really hard to release anything. It becomes really hard to release toxins from the body. It becomes really hard to appropriately release infections. It becomes really hard to release things. And we've done things in the past where, in the office, where we've done like different testing for different toxins, either through urine or stool or even in blood. And people are releasing some stuff, but really sick people, even if they have all of these things in their system, don't really release them. But when we do trauma work and then retest, all of a sudden their body begins to release all of this stuff because it finally feels safe to release things. Because underneath all of that, there are experiences that have been sequestered away and separated that aren't allowing the release of anything else.
You mentioned a little bit ago about thought processes, and one of the most common one, and even having been told this myself, that what I have is incurable. Not that that's necessarily a thought process as much as it is just a thought. Why do you challenge that idea?
I think what we have to understand is what actually incurable means from a medical understanding. So when someone says in medicine something is incurable, that means it doesn't spontaneously resolve, and or we have no gold standard of treatment for this.
So is remission the same thing as quote unquote spontaneously resolving?
In a way, yes. So
Okay.
spontaneous resolution usually will be a label put on when people don't do what their physician says and they get better.
Ah, okay.
Whereas remission is you did X, Y, and Z like you were told, and now you don't have whatever they think you have, right? And so they're slightly different. So I think it's important for people to understand that, because incurable doesn't mean impossible, okay? It means it's not going to spontaneously resolve on its own. And by that definition, well, kind of most things are quote unquote incurable. But that doesn't mean that you can't overcome them. That doesn't mean you can't resolve them. There's just effort and work and thought that needs to be put into alleviating it.
So what patterns have you seen in patients who have experienced the most dramatic, so to speak, recoveries?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is belief in the fact that there are answers and belief in the fact that they can overcome it, right? And some people will come to that place through faith. Some people will come to that place through self-belief. Some people, honestly, will just come to that because they don't want to accept what people tell them. And in many regards, that can be life-saving sometimes, right? And so it's a belief that things can improve, right? And I think one of the traps everyone falls into is most people are so scared to die.
Yeah.
Right. But we're all going to.
Well, you don't know that.
Well, yeah, maybe not. Maybe.
I could live forever
Yeah,
over
by
here.
2046, who knows?
Oh
So
gosh,
when
could you imagine? I would be so bored.
that's only 20 years from now, bud.
Feels like a long time.
Right. And so when we have that and then we're told all of these things, it plays into our fear of death, right? And so that's why so many people fall into the trap of just trying to survive rather than trying to actually live. Because there's a massive difference. Massive, massive difference. In that I'm going to take X, Y, and Z and do all these things just to try and survive long enough to do something, right? Rather than I'm going to try and uncover these things so that I can truly thrive in my life, so that I can be healthy in body, mind, and spirit for as long as I'm here for, right? There's a big difference.
You write about the nocebo effect, how negative expectations can influence outcomes, disease or not, just depending on the situation. But why is mindset so powerful in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the opinion that mindset is the most important thing, which is why at the beginning of the book, there's a whole chapter on mindset before we get into anything else, before we get into frameworks, before we get into lab testing, before we get into some of the science behind the 4 pillars, all of that stuff. The thing that precedes it all is mindset, right? Because if you don't have a mindset that's conducive to healing, well, then it doesn't matter what interventions you do, even if they are the right ones, even if they are the beneficial things. So it's seeking to understand first and foremost where you're at, how you can improve your own thinking, your own belief system, and work towards something that is more positive, right? We all carry these negative belief systems that as soon as we are diagnosed with something, instantly become reaffirming, right? So at a time of diagnosis, there's an opportunity to shift and change our mindset first and foremost and alleviate ourselves of some of these negative belief system, negative thoughts and values.
To put it simply, you want people to be more active in their healing, correct?
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it, right? Is you are not a bystander in your own healing, which is how we're all conditioned to be, right? And that's shifted and changed a lot. Like even in my time, practicing medicine, that shifted and changed a lot. But for 100 years, people would just go to their physician, do exactly what they were told, and sort of obfuscate their own thinking to somebody else, right? And when you do that, you're no longer an active participant in your health. And the unfortunate thing is, we've all sort of been told that, well, our health is not something that we can control. When in reality, it's one of the only things we can control. To a degree, right?
To a degree.
To a degree. But that starts with ownership and participation in what you're going to do, right? And we see that all the time with patients. It's like the ones who are active, willing, curious participants in the whole process do far better than the ones who aren't, right?
So if someone could just do like one thing today, what would you recommend they change?
If someone's been diagnosed with some form of autoimmunity, the most pertinent thing to do would be audit your belief systems.
Oh, I thought you were going to say get a second opinion.
Well, no, yeah, well, that too.
It's two things.
But first and foremost, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about the world around you? What do you believe about your diagnosis? Because that is going to shift and change the direction that you take. And that's far more fruitful than any intervention. Because you could say, oh, well, start working on your circadian stuff or start doing more low tox things, clean up your home, clean up your air, clean up your water, whatever. Change your relationship with your phone, all of those different things. Those are all good things. But if my belief system is based around self-doubt and fear and hatred and mistrust and all of these things, well, that's not healthy. And that's going to really dramatically change how we think and feel about ourselves and our condition and everything else. Because we've literally had people come in who've been diagnosed from other practitioners or whatever and said, well, I quote unquote karmically deserve this, or this is my punishment, or all of these different things. This is my penance. All of these crazy things, right? And it's not until we earnestly and honestly change that we're going to be able to shift and change much.
So, jumping ahead a bit in the book, you have a section on how the immune system is being designed to protect us, even like as an infant, as it's starting. What does it mean philosophically when the immune system goes haywire and starts, quote unquote, attacking itself?
I think in part we touched on this before when we were talking about trauma a little bit. When the body starts attacking itself, it usually means that there's a separation between mind and body. It usually means that there's a separation between body, soul, and spirit. And that conflict has allowed other things to become reactive things in our body. Okay? And that sort of disassociation has allowed sort of this quote-unquote attack or immune misfiring to occur. And so on the flip side, the ultimate goal then is reunification of body, soul, and spirit. And ultimately the problem is, and we've kind of touched on this a bit, but ultimately the problem is most people think that the soul and spirit stuff is too woo-woo and out there, and they're just trying to fix a body, when sometimes a lot of the things that are precipitating this autoimmunity to begin with are on a much higher level.
How do you go about addressing that or even identifying that?
Yeah, it depends on the person, depends on their proclivities a little bit.
Proclivities.
Just what they're attracted to. And so I do think earnest and honest trauma work is important.
Such as?
Yeah, just working with a trauma counselor, right? Working with a counselor, kind of going through these things. And there's a place for talk therapy, right? There's a place for somatic therapies where you're working through trauma through your body. There's a place for things like neurofeedback and all these other things to rewire the brain post-traumatic experiences. There's a place for all of these things, and I discuss a lot of this stuff in the book because there's a lot of things to discuss on that regard. But I think that's, to answer your earlier question, that's one of the big missing pieces, right? People just don't want to go there. And there's a reason they don't want to go there, because they've sequestered that part away from their conscious mind. And so even if they vaguely remember or vaguely sort of think, oh, that resonates a little bit, not often going to go there. And I mean, that was very true with you. You were very, very keen to do all of the detoxes, all of the infection remediation, all of the lifestyle changes, the food changes, all of those things. But when rubber hit the road and it was time to do trauma work, you were like, ugh, I don't want to do any of this.
Fair point. It just, when it came to that part, it felt boring.
Okay.
Compared to the rest of it.
Sure. But let me ask you this, just as a testimony. when that stuff was done, did that have a positive effect on your life, your symptoms, everything?
Yeah.
Okay. More positive than some of the other things that were deemed quote unquote more important or more
I would
pressing.
argue it was equal.
Okay. Well, that's totally fair. So, even
But
though
that's my experience.
yeah. So even though it was the quote unquote boring work, there was still an immensely positive effect.
Well, I guess
to it.
boring's not the most appropriate word. It wasn't tangible to me, so I couldn't gauge how I was doing. Whereas,
Okay.
like, when you're taking something, I can, I guess, gaslight myself into thinking that I'm going to feel better because I'm 3/4 done the bottle, so I have to feel something.
Mm. Okay. And with the trauma work, is that the shift in changes that you notice, is that something that was immediate or is that something over time?
It was situational
Mm-hmm.
in the areas that I noticed it.
Yep.
But when it would pop up, it would always be like, oh, interesting. I used to react like this, and I'm not. I guess that's growth.
Yeah. And when it comes to kind of the psycho-emotional aspect of it, and the reason why I ask you this is, in an ideal scenario, we're all going to encounter things in life. We're all going to encounter scenarios that we used to, people that we used to, situations that we used to, right? But as we work through this stuff and we begin to heal on that level, it's like a upward spiral staircase. So we're going to revisit that same spot, but we're doing it from a different place now, and we can look at it differently. We can react to it differently. The feelings in my body, my nervous system reaction, my immune system reaction is now different because I've removed the emotional component. I've removed sort of the trauma baggage from the thing. And even though I'm going to encounter those things again potentially, my reaction to it is completely different.
It was almost like the more I knew, I could shift the reaction,
Mm-hmm.
if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yep.
It's like reading a cookbook and being like, oh, okay, so this is what the souffle does, and it's going to fall, and that's fine. That's what souffles do. And then you take it out and it falls, and you weren't sad because you knew to expect it. I guess the expectation had changed after all of that
Yep.
work.
Yeah. So that is part of it too, right? So we get a rewiring of how the nervous system works. We get a rewiring of how the immune system works. But then it's also a shift and change in values, which shifts and changes our expectations. Right.
So, talking about expectations a bit and going
Mm-hmm.
back to me asking the questions. Um, as soon as you're given a diagnosis, people tend to like cling to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but when it becomes their identity, where it's like you had a case study in the book where it was like, I'm Laura. I don't remember the name, but it was like, I'm Laura. I have the one with Hashimoto's.
Mm-hmm.
How does that type of identity shape the trajectory for them?
It becomes very, very difficult to overcome an autoimmune disease when that disease becomes our identity.
But why?
Well, there's a couple of reasons.
Go on.
So, first and foremost, if I'm Megan or I'm Brendan, well, then that's just me. That's how people address me. But when I get a quote unquote big diagnosis, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, what have you, IBS, Crohn's, whatever, then what happens to a lot of people is that slowly seeps into their identity. A lot of that has to do with the fact that most people don't understand their identity to begin with. And so they latch onto something, right? And for some people, that's the sport they play, the job they have, the career they have, what they do on Instagram, whatever, that becomes their identity. For people with an autoimmune condition, oftentimes it becomes the condition itself. Because,
Their whole life revolves around it.
right, and understandably so, you're sick. Your life is going to start revolving around those things. But that means more attention from people, support groups, family, all of these things. That means, I hate to say it, that means more excuses, right? It's easy to get out of things because it's like, oh, I have this thing.
Oh yeah, I got out of a lot of dates by being like, I got a doctor's appointment in the morning, can't make it.
And so when that starts to become our identity and our source of attention, our source of being seen by the world, well, then when we start to get better and remove these things, then it's like, okay, what do we do next? Right? Like, how do I overcome this and move beyond this? Which is why, like, the last chapter of my book is really all about that, because it's like, this is a very real thing that everyone has to rectify. I used to be, especially if you've been sick for 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years, it's like you used to be the sick one. And that's how everyone started to know you. You used to be the one with the thing. Well, when you don't have the thing anymore and you're just you, well, what does that mean? How do you show up? How do you contribute? How do you do all of these different things? And that's a difficult challenge for people, for sure, as you know.
Oh yes, very acutely. So, is there a psychological cost to doctors telling patients their condition is lifelong and incurable?
Of course there is. Yeah, of course there is. Basically, if people accept that, then...
Well, there's no denying it.
Yeah, well...
Well, I guess there could be.
Mm-hmm.
Then you turn into a stubborn patient like me.
Yeah. Well, between you and other feisty patients I've had, there's a lot of people who just say flat out, I don't accept what you're saying, and I'll figure it out. But for most people, yeah, absolutely. You just kind of fall into the trap of, well, I guess I just have this thing now, and it slowly becomes part of your identity. It slowly becomes the topic of conversation for everything. It slowly becomes your quote-unquote reason. And again, you start falling in the trap of, I'm just surviving my diagnosis and I'm not actually living. You know, I can't travel, I can't eat certain foods, I can't be around certain environments or whatever because I have this thing. And your world starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and you just try and manage this little thing because you're told it's impossible and you're told it's incurable and all of these things. And so there's so much fear going on in the background that shifts and changes so many of your decisions that really prevents you from actually living a fulfilled life.
So why do you feel the medical community at large has historically been reluctant to explore that connection in their patient care?
Yeah, unfortunately, the reality is most docs have 7 to 10 minutes with people. I think we have to understand that most physicians, especially in America, their job is to get people not to die. There's a big difference between not dying and actually living. And so if my job is to prevent people from dying and rule out the big, scary, nasty stuff that's going to kill someone quickly, well, that's going to shift and change how I see things. That's going to shift and change the interventions I use. And that's very different than trying to overcome things. And we have to understand, too, that for all physicians, there's a process of unlearning. Because if we think as patients, you know, we know that like autoimmunity is attacking your body and like it's your body attacking itself and all of these things, we're told it's incurable. Well, that's what you're told in medical school. Thousands and thousands of times. That's on your exams, that's on your board exams, that's on all of these things. And so by the time you get out of medical school, you have a very preset idea of this condition needs this because that's what all my clinicians told me, that's what everyone told me, that was on my exams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I'm going to treat it. And so for me, there's a tremendous amount of unlearning that had to be done, because people would come in and say, well, I had X and I did A, B, C, and now I don't have X anymore. And instead of brushing that off, it was like, that's really interesting. I want to know why that worked. And just case by case over time, once I got into the quote unquote real world, there was always exceptions to the rule. Nothing was the textbook. And so I had to do a tremendous amount of unlearning myself to really build out this framework. And that's part of the reason why so many physicians do what they do, is because you go to school, you learn all the things, you go to a good school, you're told this is how it works, this is how these things work, and you don't really question it anymore. You just say, okay, yep. And so I don't blame anyone for that, because it's a tremendous amount of work to go through that process of unlearning and realize that there are other things out there that sort of fly in the face of a lot of the stuff that we were taught.
So in the book, you mention the current American medical system
Mm-hmm.
as being excellent at managing symptoms and keeping people from dying,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, but it's much less equipped to uncover the root cause. Do you
Mm-hmm.
feel that's just because they're trying to help as many people as they can in a day?
Yeah, part of it is that. Part of it is an incentive structure, right? Like, we're not really incentivized to have people get better, unfortunately. The way the medical system is, whether it's conventional medicine or even, dare I say, alternative medicine, all these different things, the more time people come in, the more money you make, right? And so there is a financial incentive. There is an educational component to it, right? So I think it's both of those things at play together, unfortunately.
In your opinion, do you think there's any way that that gap could be closed?
Yeah, there is. And I think times are changing rapidly.
How so?
Well, with the advent of a lot of shifts and changes in the medical system, and with the advent of AI and technology, there are people who are scanning the internet, looking at years of research, looking at all these things with AI very quickly, and realizing that there are solutions to things and implementing them in the real world in real time to get solutions to autoimmunity and to other diseases that were thought like, oh, that's impossible or whatever. So it's flying in the face of all of this conventional stuff. And I think if used correctly and rightly, that can be a wonderful thing. And I think the consensus is shifting and changing, and people in general are realizing that there are solutions out there, and there are physicians and practitioners that are providing those solutions. Um, and I think just in general, people are getting a little bit more savvy. The ones that want to be, right?
Mm.
Some people just don't want to be, and that's okay. That's totally just where they're at, and that's what they want. They just want a pill to make their symptoms go away and carry on with whatever they're doing. But for those who are genuinely curious, I think this is a wonderful time to be around, because just the solutions are becoming more and more ever present now.
So, do you believe the body is inherently designed to heal, or is disease just inevitable?
Yes, I do firmly believe that we are wonderfully and fearfully made, and we are designed to be healthy.
So, then, in a perfect world,
Mm-hmm.
with the four pillars addressed
Mm-hmm.
and atoned and at max good as it could get,
Okay.
do you think that autoimmunity would still be a thing?
No. Now,
No.
no, I don't. Now, we have to understand that historically, people would get ill and sick because of poor living conditions and poor sanitation, right? And then we throw in wars and plagues and all of this stuff, which were precipitated by sanitation and all of these different things. That's how a lot of people used to die. So people used to die from very acute, very severe things quickly. With modern medicine, we've all but eliminated most of those things, right? Which is a wonderful, wonderful achievement. But we're in a place now where we've substituted acute conditions for long-term chronic conditions that slowly kill us. Okay? So there's a balance to be had there where we can probably continue to improve upon how we treat acute conditions so we don't continue to manifest these chronic illnesses. And also, too, our environment is unfortunately just more and more toxic by the minute.
So, in your opinion,
Yes.
if we took an individual from like 1830 and put him in today, right now, right this very second, how do you think their health would go?
The funny thing is, I don't even, I'm going to use a personal example. So, I wasn't born in 1830.
I was going to say,
even
you
though I
look
got
good
a little
for your
bit of gray
age.
hair, I was not born in 1830. But I grew up in a very small town. We didn't have a Wi-Fi router at home. We didn't have cable TV. I didn't have a cell phone until I was in my 20s. Went to school in a small town. When I went to medical school, I moved to downtown Toronto. So all of a sudden, noise pollution, light pollution, tons of new EMF that I wasn't exposed to because I was living in an apartment, all of these new changes. I couldn't see the stars at night for the first time in my life. I didn't sleep for 3 months, and I got
3 months.
very, very ill because I just wasn't used to the amount of light, noise, everything else. And I had real health problems the first little bit when I moved into Toronto. And so if we compound that, someone from 1830, hypothetically, I think the biggest things are the light pollution, the noise pollution, and the EMF that we're just not prepared for, right? Those would be the big things.
So your approach places a significant amount of responsibility back into the patient's hands.
Mm-hmm.
Is it meant to be empowering? Or is it meant to be a task?
There's a cost to doing everything. And people will, the argument could be, well, it's too much work to be healthy or whatever. Okay. It's also work to not be healthy, right? You choosing
It's
not
far less work to
in
not
the
be
short term.
healthy.
In the short term, but long term, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of problems, right? So everyone has a choice, for sure. But it's meant to be empowering because there are things that you can do to shift and change your health quickly, regardless of your diagnosis, regardless of your condition. And there's impactful things that you can do. Up into including the most important thing, like I said, is auditing your mindset and your belief system and what you value and your identity. That is probably the most impactful thing that you can do. And that in and of itself should be immensely empowering because we can choose to believe kind of what others say about us or not.
Is that why you chose the word revival? The Autoimmune Revival?
Yeah, partly. I like the word revival for many, many, many reasons. But I think we're at a time now where people should be excited at the prospect that the fact that there are solutions to these kind of things that we were told there was no solutions for forever. But there's enough physicians and practitioners and clinicians all over the world helping people overcome these things. There's enough clinical data, published research to show that these things can be overcome. That should be exciting for people. That should give people hope.
So, do you think some medical dogma persists simply because it's just gone unchallenged for so long?
Yeah, that's partly that. I would say, look, I'm not the first person to bring this up by any stretch of the imagination. I just wrote a book about it. The shift in changes in what's possible have been ever present forever. And we've kind of had differing opinions, and a lot of colleagues, mentors, people I know have faced consequences for that. And so we're living kind of in this golden age where I'm getting the benefit of all of the people who are much older than me who had to fight tooth and nail for the opportunity to help people in a way that's actually allows them to overcome their conditions.
So, when someone finishes this book, either reading it in its entirety or as the way you have outlined in the preface, where they can go to specific sections and take what they need
Yep.
to hopefully rethink how they address certain situations, what is the first shift you hope that occurs?
That people earnestly and honestly believe that they can get better. That they have hope, not in a woo-woo way, but in like a real, tangible hope for the future, hope for their health, hope for their life. That they can get better. That they will get better. And I know a lot of the things when we get into the weeds of the book, it's like, holy smokes, there's this, and there's this, and there's this.
Oh,
and
there's quite a bit
there's
in
a lot
there.
of things in here. And I think one of the things in the book that I left purposefully open was allowing people to start where they felt comfortable. So that's why it's a framework, it's not a protocol. Because it would have been very easy for me to write the book from a position of, okay, if you step through these hoops, ta-da, you'll be magically better, right? Life's a little bit messier than that most of the time. Illness is a little bit messier than that most of the time. So rather than doing that, it was like, hey, here are the important things. Here's what you need to consider. This is the order that I think they should somewhat be done in, understanding that we have to tackle some of these things in tandem together, but leaving it open for people to go through it and allowing a process of self-reflection. So going through, let's just say, all the circadian stuff, and people will say, well, I feel better, but I still have positive ANA, or I still have all of these other things tied to autoimmunity. It's like, okay, well, we've only really done 15% of what needs to be looked at, let alone done, right? But that's okay. That's where people are at, right? And I think any shift and changes positively, no matter how small, are a giant win. And sometimes just starting is very, very difficult, right? And especially when we are faced with a society and a system that says, well, this is impossible to begin with. And then I say, well, it's not impossible. And here's 700 pages that's going to tell you that it's not impossible.
690 something, because there is quite a long bibliography.
There you go. People are like, well, it's basically impossible because that's a lot of stuff to do. It's like, no. I get it. I totally get it. But this is a question of doing things at your own pace, right? And the reality is sometimes this stuff can take 3, 4, 5 months. Sometimes it can take 3, 4, 5 years, depending on how long it's been going on, depending on how much sequelae there are from the conditions. Like if you have tissue damage, if you have all these other things, it can take longer. And just being okay with it, like it's going to take as long as it takes. I just have to work through these things in a way that makes sense physiologically, but then also a way that makes sense for the person.
Ultimately, do you believe autoimmune disease is a biological problem or an environmental problem or simply a cultural problem?
Autoimmunity is a disconnection from self. So it's a psycho-emotional thing first and foremost that trickles into our physical reality through toxicity and infection and in all these other imbalances. Set in an environment that is not conducive to our healing by any stretch of the imagination, set in a culture that by and large does not prioritize health, that does not think it's important other than not dying.
Not dying's good.
Right. So we have all of those things together. It's like the Russian nesting doll of the whole thing. In the beginning of the book, I talk about kind of my model, what I call sort of the levels of healing, right? And we are so conditioned to think of us just as like this magic meat suit that walks around and that's all we are, right? So when we have physical expression of symptoms, we seek just if I relieve that physical symptom, I'll magically be better, right? But there's a soul and a spirit on top of that, right? There's mind, will, emotions, and our spirit on top of that. When we understand that problems on a spiritual level, that problems on a mind level, emotional level, can trickle into the physical body and cause real physical symptoms, cause real physical illness, then we are instantly 10 steps ahead because we understand that this isn't just about, just suppress the magic symptom of whatever, joint pain or all these other things. And we can work on actually healing, all right? So on a very, very simple level, autoimmunity is a disconnection from self. And so we can no longer process what's us and what's not us. And we instantly think any new thing is not us. Problem. Attack.
Very nicely said. So where can people buy the Autoimmune Revival?
Right now, you can go to the website, autoimmunerevival.com. We got a link there. You can also get it on Amazon. Just look up Autoimmune Revival, and it should be the first thing that comes up.
In paperback and on Kindle.
Yep, we got paperback, and we got Kindle electronic version.
That was a great idea to do Kindle. Well, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yep. So autoimmunerevival.com and aquarianhealthsolutions.com are our two websites right now. Autoimmunerevival.com will be all about autoimmunity. In addition to links to the book, I have a whole bunch of articles on different precipitating factors of autoimmunity, different interventions for autoimmunity. So that's probably the best place to start.
And if they wanted to follow you on social, it's Aquarian_integrative_health, as well as Dr. B. McLaughlin. Both of those on Instagram.
You know better than me. That sounds about right.
If they want to, they love the book, they want to read more about it, and other thoughts you've got kicking around up there, they can follow your blog on Substack, and that's Aquarian Insights as well, correct?
Yeah, so if you just go on Substack and type in Aquarian Insights, you'll see me.
Perfect. Well, I hope you guys had a great time. I know I certainly did.
Before we go, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay, great. Let's do it.
As someone who battled through 5 different autoimmune conditions, that was told they had cancer and put on cancer drugs at a very young age, by the way, as someone who has faced all of the mental, emotional sequelae that come with that, the burden that gets placed on you, especially when you're young, as someone who's had to deal with all of that and now come out the other side of it, what would you say? One, what would you say to you when you first started all of this? And then, so by proxy, what, like, if someone's newly diagnosed and just facing these things and having reality set in, what would you say? But I think more importantly, what would you say to your younger self?
You know, I've actually thought about that before.
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone's like, oh, dear younger me, you know, like, keep going or whatever. And it's none of that fluffy duddy stuff. I was the kid that asked 1,000,001 questions, and why was my absolute favorite word up until like a month ago. So just keep asking why. If all of a sudden something happens and you can't eat the food you used to always enjoy, or you can't physically do something to the same capabilities that you were used to, going somewhere and asking why until they quite honestly have no explanation left to give you is, I think, the best thing someone can do. Because there's always a why.
Why?
Because there's always a why. At the end of it, if it's not succinct in one thing, it's not the full answer. It's not the full picture. It's not what's actually going on.
So you're saying be open and curious to all possibilities.
Correct, yes. But also, no is a full answer. So if someone gives you something you don't like and you don't want to go down that path, you can say no to it. You don't have to do the things they tell you to do, especially if they're not willing to sit down with you and tell you why they want you to do it in the first place.
Beautiful. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Brendan. I appreciate your time.